Today we're going to focus on the theories of evolution. Evolution is defined as any change over time. The evolution of the automobile, going from the 1920s all the way to 2020. There's a change in the structure, a change in design. That is what we're referring to as evolution, a change. Now there can be small changes called microevolution, and then there can be large changes, maybe between species, called biological evolution. Biological evolution would be something like an ape turning into a human, an amphibian turning into a reptile, or a reptile to a bird, or fish to an amphibian. So the word evolution has several different meanings. The first one, microevolution, this is more adaptation. This would be a general or simple change within a specific species over time. This can actually be a short period of time, like even a season. So microevolution is more of that adaptation, summer to winter, and then winter back to summer. A dog or a cat, some animal, their fur will get thicker, and then in the summer it'll shed some of the fur. The fur will become thinner. Or the coat will become thinner. So this is a normal process of adaptation, maybe through seasons. But then if we contrast that with organic or biological evolution, which is a large change, this is also known as macroevolution. This is more of what you hear about with the belief or the theory of evolution, when you're going from one organism to another, one species to another species. So both of those are changes, but they're completely different. Now, it is observed that you do have small adaptations, you have changes, you change from a baby to an adult, you go through puberty. That would be microevolution. You are still a human, you are still your species. But organic biological evolution, this is the large scale of what an evolutionist will believe, changing species. Do we have proof? Do we have facts? Do we have fossils that show biological evolution? A lot of people will argue about that. Do we have proof of changing from one species to another? So we have the theory of evolution, which is a belief based on observations and experiments. Remember, because we can't necessarily prove evolution through experiments and observations, it's a theory. And then you have the doctrine of evolution. Just like we put our faith as Christians in the Bible, put our faith in Jesus Christ, different viewpoints, people are going to put their faith in something. So the doctrine of evolution is a belief that is held to be true by evolutionists, even without concrete evidence or proof. So this is a belief, this is a faith. So the theory of evolution can become, or in many times, is a faith or belief. So if you hear someone say that evolution is science and then it's true, we know that evolution is a theory. It can't be proven by observations and experimentation. So when a comment like that comes out, that is actually more following into the doctrine of evolution. So this belief expresses that all we can see can be accounted by a random natural effect. Some evolutionists will believe that it happened through the Big Bang, without a designer, without God. But there are also evolutionists who do believe that God used evolution. That is going to be called theistic evolution. This is a combination or a compromise of the Bible and evolution, or Christianity and evolution. Now, to do a little history of Darwin's voyage. Darwin in 1831 basically joined the HMS Beagle, traveled around the world. One of the most famous trips was to the Galapagos Islands, and there he observed tortoises and finches, and especially the finches with the different beaks, That is a prime example of natural selection or changing of the beaks because of different location, and those beaks are in the genetics, and because of the isolation of the birds mating in different areas, we have different sized beaks. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is a new species. It's not. It's still the finch species, but they're different character traits. Just like if different people will marry and have children, there's going to be an isolation of genes and genetics. But Darwin, when he observed those things, he really pushed evolution, or this focus that there would be macroevolution. Now, what we can clearly see, those are still finches, and those small changes, that would be microevolution, just like if you have different character traits from your genes, that's microevolution. But basically, is it forming a new species? No, it's still finches. So the first thing that we see here with natural selection is variation. We said variation is changes, and changes can occur through different genetics, different genes that we just learned in our previous unit and chapter. Now, organisms within populations exhibit individual variations in appearance and behavior. Now, these variations include body size, hair color, facial markings, voice properties, and or the number of offspring. So variation just means change. Then we have inheritance. The focus here was that some traits are consistently passed on from one parent to offspring. We talked about heredity. Such traits are heritable, whereas other traits are strongly influenced by the environment. Then we have population growth, and most populations that now Darwin observed the populations, not just the character traits and the structures passed on from maybe different animals to their offspring, but he also looked at population growth. What animals were able to survive and struggle for resources and compete for food, and this focuses again on that natural selection. What can survive? Different genetic traits can help with survival. That doesn't mean we're evolving into a new organism. It does mean that a certain trait may help the survival. Now, if you think about before the Industrial Revolution, you have the peppered moth and the white moth. When there was less pollution, the white moth population increased. The peppered moth population, or the dark gray moth population, was very low. After the Industrial Revolution, you have a lot of pollution and so forth. You have a switch in the population. The white moth now is easier to find because of the pollution and the dust and dirt in the cities, and the white moth population drops, the peppered moth population rises. This doesn't mean the white moth evolved and turned into the peppered moth. It's just a change in population. Then we have differential survival and reproduction. Individuals possessing traits well suited for the environment will survive, and that does tie in again with the moth. If you think about the white-haired rabbit, when there's lots of snow, it can blend in, but if there's no snow and that white rabbit is easily able to be picked off by a fox or a wolf, okay, the population of the white rabbit will drop. Now, these are different character traits, natural selection, or you could say maybe even this survival of the fittest. Does this necessarily mean that it is turning into a new organism or a new species? No, these are different observations that we see. If it's able to fit in, it has a greater chance to survive. And these observations, Darwin observed different traits from genetics, heredity, and also survival. Here are some other ideas and observations proposed by Darwin. Then we have the evolution mutation theory, and this was proposed by de Vries. And the main point here is that mutations lead to evolution, and mutations lead to biological evolution. So a mutation or a sudden change will cause that organism to be better and survive and then turn into a new organism. But the problem here is for evolution to occur, you need new genes, okay, entering the gene pool. Well, we know that when we have children, when there is offspring, the children will not get a new trait that was not there from the parents. You have to get the alleles from the parents in order to get that gene, that trait. And so basically, the problem here is a mutation, as we already learned with genetic mutations and disorders. Mutations are primarily negative. They're harmful. Only a few really, don't hurt you. We talked about quite a few of these mutations. Can you ever really get a good mutation? Now, we're not talking about science fiction or sci-fi or comics, anime and all that, where you have X-Men and you have these super good mutations. But in reality, mutations hurt the organism. Now, the evolution mutation theory of de Vries leads to the modern day mutation selection theory, also known as neodarwinism. I'm going to show you some different evolutionary trees found in textbooks that actually show how animals are linked together or have evolved to other organisms. There's really no proof to this. What we do have here is we can look at similar features. This can point out to a common creator, and Ken Ham actually talked about this. If you did watch the video on Ken Ham, I think for one class it was an optional video, but basically instead of this evolutionary tree, if you had the focus on different kinds, you have more of an orchard. And here you have the evolutionary tree, and this actually identifies and shows how one organism is going through macroevolution and changing to another organism. And basically, this evolutionary tree is found in many textbooks, and if you think about it, it's showing you that man came from apes and how humans are related to cows and how cows and whales are very similar, and then we and they evolved from marsupials, which evolved from and very similar to fish, and how birds evolved from lizards. And wait a minute, if you continue on, we're also related to plants. So there was a point where humans have gradually evolved from plants. So, if you think about plants, would then be the palms, grasses, bananas, the conifers, the ferns would be your somewhere down the road your cousin, and you're related or evolved from that. That's basically this viewpoint of the evolutionary tree, and even evolved or branched off from what is formed in bacteria. Okay, here's the creation orchard that Ken Ham actually used, that instead of humans being related to bacteria and plants and being evolved from those things or from cells that branched off and created bacteria, that God created different kinds, and that's how Noah got those animals on the ark, but that these different kinds then branched off and made different species. So we have different species of dogs, different species of apes, different species of finches and birds. And then you have a illustration here of gradualism, and gradualism, according to evolution, would be a slow change. Okay, gradual meaning slow. And then you contrast that with a long period of time, and you have spontaneous jumps or changes. This would be punctuated equilibrium. This is a big jump between one organism to another, making a new change. So spontaneous is a sudden happening. Okay, this is also another picture found in a textbook in which you can see similarities of organisms in these drawings and showing that these organisms evolved from other organisms. So is there a common ancestor? Or if there's similarities, is there a common creator? Now, this was actually another drawing used in textbooks, and basically, this was drawn by Haeckel. That was his last name. And here's a quote here from Charles Darwin: "The strongest single class of facts in favor of my theory would this drawing of Haeckel, showing similar vestigial organs." And basically, inside the womb, this drawing shows that evolution happens within the womb. So when the woman is pregnant, okay, her little baby starts going through this evolutionary process, okay, changing and forming, okay, different structures that are very similar to organisms. Well, basically, but what we do know is that from the technology that we have now, that there is no evolution happening in the womb, that we do have some similar features or division of the cells, but the baby does not have gills. It has a pharyngeal pouch. Pharynx or pharyngeal just means throat area as the baby's developing and forming. And so basically you can see the drawings and how the drawings are actually a misrepresentation of the real embryos, and you can see the contrast between the different embryos. Okay, remember homo referring to same, so homology is referring to the same or similar features. You can take a look at different animals having a humerus, radius and ulna in the arm, that's the forearm, the different carpals, metacarpals of the hand, and you can see the different similarities, and this does point to a common creator, while an evolutionist will look at this and say this is a sign or a proof of evolution or biological evolution. Then we're going to go to Lamarck. Lamarck came up with the idea of inheritance of acquired characteristics, or the focus of need and use and disuse. Now, the main point here again is biological evolution, that you need time, just like you saw in the illustration with punctuated equilibrium or gradualism, you need a long period of time. The focus here is the tendency is towards perfection, to be better, to evolve into something better, or even need. You can see the illustration that he used was the giraffe. The giraffe used to have a short neck according to Lamarck, but then stretched its neck to get leaves to eat because it needed the leaves to survive. Well, if you think about it, what did the giraffe have to stretch out? Its vertebrae. The giraffe does not have extra vertebrae. The giraffe has the same number of vertebrae that humans have, which are a total of 7 cervical vertebrae. So that means the giraffe would have had to make each bone get bigger and bigger and bigger. So, which is somewhat impossible. I mean, we can stretch the neck, and that's muscles, but is the bone getting bigger? If the giraffe can't get the leaves, well, it's going to die. How can it pass on traits of stretching the neck a little bit to the children? Well, can I do that? Can I chop off my arm? Will my children, be born without arms? If we modify our body, will those things be passed on to children? So there's a lot of questions here and problems with this theory and this idea of need and use and disuse. So the first point here is tendency towards perfection and need. The second point is use and disuse. If something is used it will be kept. If it's not used, it will disappear. Now, one of the things that people have pointed out to this is the appendix, that we don't need it. It's just a vestigial organ. It was left behind from our evolution. But we're actually seeing a lot of scientists now are saying that the appendix was used and is used to help us protect against bacterial diseases. And then we have, or bacterial infections. And then we do have inheritance of acquired characteristics, passing on new traits. But the problem here is DNA determines our traits, not what we need. And can genes be turned on and off in the lab? Yes, but can it happen in nature? No. And then DNA, our genetic info, is what you inherit, not physical modification. Now you can see these women, they have added rings stretching out their neck, but what they found is that if they remove the rings, their head will collapse, the muscles are weak, their vertebrae did not get larger. They are stretching out their neck, but basically their head can tip over, they can suffocate to death and block their trachea. Then we had the primordial soup hypothesis. This was actually a 1920s hypothesis identifying the beginning of life leading to the Big Bang, that there was these gases or this kind of soupy material, all these chemicals together that created life. So Miller and Urey created an experiment that mixed gases together to try and simulate the Big Bang creating life, to prove biological evolution, or to prove evolution with chemicals. Now, they did this experiment, and you can do an experiment to try and prove these things, but all that was formed was mixing different elements, different compounds together to create. Now remember, amino acids are the basic building blocks or units of protein. Now, in order to make a living thing, you need to have the correct order of amino acids, but life was never created. An organism was never created. We mix gases together. Certain amino acids came together. It's like taking different letters in Scrabble and kind of shaking it up, and a couple words come up. Now, compounds did get created from mixing these and using electricity, but think about how complex life is. Think about how complex an organism is. You would actually have to, from these Scrabble pieces, create a novel, and it would have to make sense. It would have to be in order. It would have to have the correct grammar. So remember, if one thing is wrong in genetics, remember we talked about the mutations of addition, deletion, substitution. If a missing chromosome, if things were out of order, you would get death. I mean, you'd get a major mutation, a major harmful mutation. So to create this experiment, as you can see here, you have the spark chamber, you have electricity, you have a heat source. Then we have the endosymbiont theory. Endo meaning inside, symbiote referring to symbiosis or relationship between two organisms. Basically, this is saying that the mitochondria, the chloroplasts, which are organelles, came from bacteria, came from the prokaryotes. Basically, it's saying that these were ingested or eaten, okay, but not digested. So like a little bacteria went over a mitochondria, sucked it in, and then said, hey, I'm going to keep that organelle and I'm going to turn it into a eukaryote. And then after it added it to its body, it then reproduced with the new organelle. So if you really think about that, can I add something surgically to my body? Can I add something and then pass it on to my children? No. Then we have the iron sulfur world hypothesis, and basically this is Now, these hydrothermal vents would have a higher amount of iron, nickel, and sulfur, and using those things, it was able to take on these elements and form organic molecules. So is macroevolution really observed? Are there proofs? Okay, are there really missing links? And this is, of course, Photoshop, but when we go ahead and we look at similarities between animals, the focus on evolution is that because there's similarities and there is similarities with genetics and structure, we evolve from them. Well, is that something that we can actually say just because we see a similarity? This is actually drawings and models created, found in museums, based on similarities or based on actual pieces found. Now, if you look pieces of fossils found, and these are the so-called cavemen or missing links. And what we have here is Homo habilis. Humans are actually, the genus and species name is Homo sapien. So this construct of Homo habilis was actually found by these pieces of bone. If you look at the three skulls on the right, the colored pieces are all they found. So the white pieces are just trying to construct it together. So if you see, quite a few of those dark pieces are just little fragments. There's a lot of imagination here. There's a lot of going that extra mile to create something. Was there really a missing link? I mean, we don't have full bones here. If you look at the bones of between a wolf and a chihuahua, very different, just because there's larger, maybe a larger brow or a larger structure. It doesn't necessarily mean that one is maybe evolved from the other. Both of them exist now. What we also have is Homo erectus, and basically we have these structures, just the dark pieces were found, and we, just from pieces of the skull, they came up with a whole body illustration. And Homo erectus is referring to erect meaning standing up. Then we have the Java man. We only have little bits and pieces, a jaw fragment, teeth, a femur, and from those pieces a whole body was actually designed. And what's even crazier is that all these pieces were found 45 feet apart from each other. And here we have the Piltdown Man pieces. Again, only those pieces were found. And this is the drawing they came up with just the black pieces. Really trying to push this missing link or biological evolution. Then we have the Nebraska Man, and this was in 1922. This actually found its way into textbooks as well. And this was a reconstruction of a caveman from a single tooth. It was later discovered that this was actually from a extinct pig. Then you can also see some more examples of just pieces of jaw, and then you have the drawings from just these little pieces.